listening to the Recovering Methodism podcast, a global Methodist voice for navigating life and ministry in the 21st century, tackling the issues impacting the church and recovering the distinctly Methodist practices to participate in the next great awakening. And now your hosts, David Cady and Caleb Spiker.
Let's shut that door.
And we're back. Time for another exciting episode of Recovering Methodism.
Yes, sir. Looking forward to it. This is probably episode, I don't know what number we've done, 5 or 6 now in the queue, and it's getting more interesting every time we do it. I look forward to having these conversations.
Yeah, I think we have maybe figured out some of the sound issues so that, if you first listened and said, why does it sound like they're in a bathtub?
Well, Pastor Dave needs to be closer to the mic. That's the problem. Yeah, that's on me. So I gotta be a little closer to the microphone.
I think we're figuring it out. So I don't know if you remember this. You probably do. Well, maybe not, because I know you had a tendency not to be present at annual conference back in the day.
Ouch.
But the story goes, because I think this was before my time, Brusso got up for the State of the Annual Conference address, and he says, pastors, we need 3 things in our annual conference. Your local church needs 3 things. They are leadership. All right, you were there.
I was there.
But today we're talking about leadership.
Yeah. And more specifically, leadership development. I'm looking forward to getting into the book conversation, Caleb's library and the toolbox, and talking about nominations and filling those spots and raising new leaders. I think it's going to be a really good episode.
Well, we can hope so. So from the front end of it, what does it look like to develop leadership? Where do you start in the local church or in your home or in your workplace, especially when we're talking about leadership that takes on the character of Jesus?
That's the important part right there, is the leadership that takes on the character of Jesus. And so one of the things I look for is just to see what the depth of spiritual maturity someone has, if they have a heart for Jesus and a heart for others. That goes a long way to for me at least, to say that person might be a really good leader in the local church. So that's kind of what I look at. Do they reflect the character of Jesus and just how they interact with others? And I think also if there's just an evident that they understand the mission of the church and they're on board with that, I think that's key to it as well. And so those are a couple things I look for. Their spiritual maturity and their understanding of the mission. Those 2 things go a long way for me.
Yeah, I think that's super important when we are looking at who to invite into that process. But once you've identified those people, what does it look like, especially in a volunteer organization like our own, to help someone develop and become all who they've been created to be as a leader in the local church?
That's a great question. I think Jesus demonstrates that. You have to spend time with people. And it's an opportunity to build relationship and to grow in that relationship with each other. And maybe, at least from your perspective, I think, maybe suggesting some books to read and maybe conferences to attend together and maybe some retreats and prayer time. And I just think leadership isn't done in a vacuum. It's done in relationship. So I think it's having those leaders spend time together and with the pastoral staff and growing together as a team.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you're saying that, I was also reminded of the importance of leading yourself to a position that you can lead someone else from.
Sure, that makes sense.
that so much of being a good leader and the kind of leader who develops other leaders is hungering and thirsting for greater leadership out of yourself.
Right.
That learner mentality and continuing to develop your own capacity to not just lead yourself but lead others.
Well, let me just back up real quick. What is leadership then, right? So one of the answers I learned a long time ago is leadership is influence. Bottom line, simply put, it's influence, being able to influence others, influence an organization, and in our context, influencing a group of people to fall deeper and deeper in love with Jesus, and to be committed to his cause of sharing the message of redeeming love with the world. So that's part of what happens here at the local church level, is helping people to understand that mission and being able to influence and be influenced by that group of people for the sake of the mission. Someone once said, if you think you're leading and no one's following, you're just taking a walk. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I know. Someone whose work on leadership has been influential in my thinking about it is John Wooden, who coached at UCLA back in the 70s.
The Wizard of Westwood.
Wizard of Westwood.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've come to really appreciate about Wooden's take on leadership is that exact piece, right? That the search for excellence and greatness on an individual level is one thing, but to have a mind towards making that excellence and that greatness attainable by everyone, so that it's not just you getting the win, but it is the body gain the win,
right.
The team gain the win.
Right.
I think there's a big shift there, and one that is not necessarily easy to make.
Tell me more. What kind of shift?
Well, so I am. I was that kid who tended to not be a very good teammate because I was frustrated that the other kids on the team didn't care as much as I did.
I can see that.
Yeah. So much so that, like, by the time I was a sophomore in high school, I was only playing tennis. Because when you're playing tennis, it's you and the other guy, right? Like, there are no teammates to get frustrated with.
That's right.
So imagine my consternation in realizing that in the local church, that mentality doesn't get you very far.
You're right. And reality, you've mentioned this before in a previous episode, that in our line of work, in our lives, we spend about, 60, 70, 80 hours a week thinking about ministry in the local church. And week to week what happens, and month to month what happens, and planning 6 months out. Whereas the majority of people in the church may not clearly be given, thinking about ministry 60, 70 hours a week, right? And so that you have to recognize that right up front, right? And so the question is, how do you meet people where they are and help them be influenced to a place where they can take a journey with you and making the local church be more than what it has been, and perhaps even better way to say that is all that, at least closer to what Jesus has called it to be.
Yeah.
And when we live in idealism, right, you can have a very frustrating life when you think, right, this isn't what it's supposed to be.
And how many of our colleagues have we known who have just beaten their heads against a wall, expecting things from folks that they're just never going to get?
Colleagues, me, probably you, right?
Often, yeah.
Right? So there have been times of deep frustration, and then you realize, okay, these are people that I've been called to shepherd and called to love, and trust that God's will get us where we need to go. And that's one of the learning curves I've experienced over the years, is to say, okay, we may not get there tomorrow, and that's okay, but we can take steps today with the people that God has entrusted to us to at least look in that direction, and when the time comes, maybe we can take a step in that direction. whatever that direction is, whether it's a new service or a new ministry or a satellite campus or whatever it may be, building project. People need time to come along on those ideas, and they may not be on the radar screen. And you just got to take time and be in relationship with people.
Well, and I think there's wisdom in the Christian traditions that call their clerics father.
Oh, tell me more about that. That's an interesting statement.
Because as a father of a 9, an 8, and 5-year-old, I am perpetually thinking about what is the next thing that my 5-year-old needs to get to the next place.
Okay.
What's the next thing my 8-year-old needs to get to the next place? What's the next thing my 9-year-old needs to get to the next place? I'm not living in the frustration of why aren't they acting like 16-year-olds?
Because they're not, right?
Because they're not. And I think that shift in thinking from, shepherd, which isn't, a bad title for people in our industry, but that shift in thinking from shepherd, where it's like sheep, go do sheep stuff, which, man, sheep are, like, talk to any farmer about sheep. They are the dumbest animals on the planet. They look for ways to die. But from that shift from the role that we have as shepherd, just trying to keep the sheep from not dying and being frustrated that they keep doing things that lead to death, to the shift to fatherhood, where it's like these people who God has entrusted into our care are people who are on a trajectory that we can partner with God in helping them move to where they need to go. I think it's a helpful picture.
I would agree with that. I like that because it implies relationship, right? Mm-hmm. It implies loving oversight, right? And one of the clear biblical language and imagery of pastoring is overseer, right? Mm-hmm. Concept that we see in a lot of Paul's writings, overseer. I remember reading somewhere, I forget where it was, that leadership is initiating change at a pace that people can tolerate. I mean, that's just, it's this true story. And I'm sure you and others have experienced leadership, we'll say failures or miscues, where change was initiated at too quick a pace. Yeah. And so I've always been mindful, at least in the past several years, of making sure that the amount of change that a congregation experiences is enough that they can tolerate, and they'll let you know if it's too much. And some of it's out of your control. I mean, we can't control COVID. We can't control staff changes. We can't. There's only so much we can do with all that disaffiliation. But at the same time, we can at least try to provide some sense of stability in the midst of all of the changes that occur, even the ones that we don't initiate. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, Tom Hanover has a really helpful image where he says, the majority of the folks in the church are infantry. You as the pastor and the people who are your entrepreneurial early adjusters, the sort of people who tend to want to be in leadership are oftentimes cavalry. And you can't forget that there's artillery. And if you as the cavalry get too far out ahead, the artillery will think you're the enemy.
That's a good imagery.
And they'll start firing.
Makes sense. Friendly fire, but at the same time, sometimes you can't tell, right?
Yep. So, being able to be mindful of the different paces of making change. Because the other people on horseback with you, they are unwilling to just sit there with the cannons.
Sure.
Right? The horses will take off and they'll take off with them.
Right.
But, being able to think through that dynamic and be able to communicate change to the groups and bring along the right sort of people to be in those different places tends to be important.
So one of the things that's been on my mind recently, and I just want to touch on this because it ties into the relational aspect of leadership. I've always been a task-oriented leader, always. And it's always frustrated me to be around relational-oriented people because it's like, well, we got stuff to do, right?
That's right.
And so over the years, God has, I think, helped shape and mold my approach to leadership to say, like Woody Hayes would say, you win with people, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that's been on my heart and mind recently, I had heard this at the Allegheny West Annual Conference. I remember hearing it from previous Episcopal leadership in West Ohio. That question, the historic question is, will you visit from house to house? Right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the answer that in the ordinands often say is yes, I will, or yes, with the help of God, or whatever it may be. And it's one of those questions that often gets kind of glossed over because we laugh at the "Are you in debt?" question, and we, will you preach and teach that? Yes, we will. But will you visit from house to house? And it implies that you're going to be in relationship with these people. And we often think of that as we're going to visit them when they're sick or so forth, and that's obviously part of it. But I mean, we're doing this foundations class in somebody's home.
Yep,
that's critical. Mm-hmm. It's just we could have done it here at the church, but it would have been a layer of complexity that would have diminished the impact of the process, right? Yep. And so this concept of visiting from house to house, I think, is very important in leadership development because it sends the message, I want to be in relationship with you. Mm-hmm. So I would just encourage folks out there, especially folks that are maybe in a smaller context, to be mindful of the importance of visiting from house to house. I have fond memories in my first appointment of snapping green beans with an elderly couple in the entrance to their garage, on a late summer day, and just listening and asking questions and learning. John Maxwell often talks about the importance of, when he was a younger pastor, of going out and baling hay with some of the farmers in his community as a way of saying, I'm here to serve you, serve with you, I'm one of you, I want to be your friend, right? And so that's just critical. As far as I'm concerned, for leadership development, it comes back to that historic question of Methodist pastors, will you visit from house to house?
Indeed. And I think there's, we tend to prop up the high achievers. The examples that we look at are the people who maximize every moment of their day. The people who are able to get 6 new initiatives off the ground last month.
Right,
you name it. But then we look at the example of Jesus, and he hung out with the same 12 guys for 3 years, with a few other stragglers who came and went. I mean, Jesus would not have been an effective pastor.
Unpack that a little bit more.
Well, sure.
Because they can't see the air quotes.
Oh, they can't.
They can't see the air quotes.
This idea of how we tend to measure effectiveness in noses and nickels. And you look at the ministry of Jesus, and he had the same congregation for 3 years. Didn't grow it past 12, and one of them sold him out at the end.
Different metric, huh?
It's a different metric.
Right.
But, back to some of the conversations we've had about discipleship, wisdom would say, invest in a smaller group more deeply rather than trying to chase the crowd.
Okay.
And that's how you develop leaders, is you invest in that smaller group,
right,
in deep ways.
Right. It's good stuff. It's good conversation. And I think that if there are folks out there listening that have other thoughts that maybe we could circle back to at a later date, What's the email address that they can maybe send some ideas around this or ideas around further big idea kind of conversations? What's the email address?
Yeah, recoveringmethodism@gmail.com.
recoveringmethodism@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, hear your thoughts around leadership development or questions you may have that we can circle back to, or other ideas that maybe we could tie into for future episodes.
That's right.
All right. I think it's time to maybe hear a little jingle about Caleb's Library, and then we can unpack our conversation about a book you've been reading.
Lucky for you, here it is. Man, the timing could not have been better.
And now it's time for Caleb's Library.
All right. We are looking forward to another edition of Caleb's Library. And I'm sitting in the shadow of a massive shelf of books in Caleb's Library. And he pulled one off that we're going to talk about today called 5Q. It's a book by Alan Hirsch. And maybe give us the subtitle of 5Q.
It's reactivating the original intelligence and capacity of the body of Christ. So he's playing off the idea of IQ with 5Q from Ephesians chapter 4. The other places called the fivefold ministry gifting, the apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher.
Yep. I sat in Alan Hirsch's workshop at Exponential in Orlando, Florida. When was that? About 2016-ish? 6-7 years ago, something like that. You were there. We were there together.
Yeah.
And so I remember this particular discussion. And it is based on Ephesians 4 and the fivefold call to ministry. And remind us, if you will, Hirsch's point is that not every individual is going to manifest these particular areas of ministry, but every church, right? Every local church should, right? And if I recall here, I'm in Ephesians 4, I believe, if I could find it here. Here it is, Ephesians 4, starting in verse 11. It was he, speaking of Christ, who gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers. Pastors and teachers, that's the fifth one, right? Yeah, the verse combines pastors and teachers in the same verse. But the goal here is those 5 areas of ministry, verse 12, to prepare God's people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up until we reach unity in the faith, knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So tell us more about what Hirsch is going for, tying that into Ephesians 4, and a little bit about those 5 areas of ministry.
Yeah, so Hirsch's big argument is that for a church to operate the way God has designed the church to operate, you need those with apostolic gifting, those with prophetic gifting, those with evangelistic gifting, those with shepherding gifting, and those with teaching gifting to all be in a place to exercise their gifts.
Right.
So oftentimes in the American church, we have said we're going to hire a shepherd/teacher to do the work of ministry.
Right.
And that is going to be what we do. That's what church is going to be. It's going to be a weekly book report. And when I'm sick and hurting, someone will come and care for me.
Right. The teacher/shepherd aspect of ministry, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And Hirsch's point is that without that ape, without the apostles, the prophets, and the evangelists, the church is not living into its full potential and what God desires the church to be.
You said ape, right? APE?
Ape. Yeah,
I'm
I'm
just unpacking it for those who are like, what did he just say?
Yeah.
Apostolic gifting.
Prophetic gifting. And evangelistic.
So let's just start real quick here. Apostolic gifting would be an individual or a group of people who are saying, we really need to have other ministries outside the church, right? So maybe folks that are really into mission and ministry and starting new areas of worship, or who are looking outside the walls. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's the innovative people, the folks who tend to have lots of ideas and lots of energy on the front end, but maybe you don't see once something's off the ground. But yeah, that sort of ministerial entrepreneur.
Okay. And there may be folks here listening who are...
I would also add, too, that the person who is good at making the connections between here's how we get from A to B.
Right. So the word apostle or apostolic means sent one, right? To be sent. And the idea is this is an individual or group of people who are always looking for the next thing on the horizon for the church to do or get involved with. And that's necessary, right? But what about the prophetic gifting?
They're the ones who are willing to stand up and say something's not working.
All right. And they're very popular people, right?
Have you ever been on staff with someone who's got the prophetic gifting?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Yeah. They're everybody's best friend.
Right, but that can be done in a way that says, no, wait a second, right? So let's just talk about this. So let's say there's someone who has an apostolic gifting and says, listen, we're the only Global Methodist congregation inside 270, and we want to change that. Right? We want to make sure that there are other Global Methodist congregations in all the other suburbs around Columbus, right?
Yep.
And the prophetic person may say, well, what about justice ministries? Or what about what we're doing right here in our local church? We don't want to oversee that. Because they call us back to reality, don't they? In ways that say you're missing something here.
I think not only do they call us back to reality, they're the ones who make sure we don't allow pragmatism to rule the day. So I am by nature very much a pragmatist. I don't care if something is right or wrong until I know if it's going to work.
Okay, got it.
Once it works, we can talk about the morality of it, the ethics of it, the right or wrongness of it.
Okay.
The prophet says, no. You do, if it's not right, I don't care if it works. If it's not good, I don't care if it works.
Okay. So they're sort of like the conscience.
In large part, yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. And keeps the church itself grounded, right? And making sure that there aren't groups of people that are overlooked, right?
Along with the shepherd, yeah, they tend to
right. But
do that
I mean,
together.
I would say the prophetic voice may be asking the hard questions that we don't always want to have to deal with, right? So let's think of the apostle as this great visionary cheerleader. It's going to be great, and we're going to win lots of people to Jesus, and it's going to be great. And the prophet would say, well, what about who are you going to win, and how are you going to take care of the poor, and how are you going to do this, right? Because it calls us back to this reality of areas that we say, I don't know, I haven't given much thought to that.
Yeah.
So in many ways, the prophet becomes the conscience of the organization. Would you agree with that?
Yep.
Okay. Which, again, is not always a popular place to be.
Nope.
But they need to be listened to. And the role of the prophet in the Scriptures, especially the Old Testament, was to call people back, right? Call people back to God, right? And to listen to what God is saying, and to call them back to this deeper commitment to making sure that God's mercy and justice is being lived out. So what about the evangelist, the E?
The evangelist is just what they sound like. They're the person who has an eye and a heart and a mind towards those on the outside. Whereas the shepherd is focused largely internally, the evangelist will be focused largely externally.
Aren't we all called to be evangelists?
Yes.
Are we all evangelists?
Not all of us are gifted in the same way towards evangelism.
There you go. Have you ever been around somebody who is just a very gifted evangelist? It's a beautiful thing to see.
It is.
They have a real knack for just starting spiritual conversations. I've seen people do it in an elevator, right? In like a 30-second elevator ride. I'm like, I'm just looking at my phone here, and you've already like led someone to Christ in the 30 seconds it's taken to get from floor 4 to floor 1, and it's just beautiful to see.
And one of the things that Hirsch points out is that this is written into the very fabric of humanity, right? Like you look at Apple, and they are thinking in terms of who is in these roles. Because they're evangelists for Apple products.
Absolutely.
Right? There are the apostles who keep who keep pushing for innovation and new things. There are the teachers who are developing the new products. There are the prophets who are saying, wait a second, are we sure that we want 9-year-olds to have this much screen time? And they tend to get diminished. But then they go home and they work in Silicon Valley and their kids don't have tablets.
That's a reality. That. That's right. I know.
It is. But yeah, these roles tend to be the way God has created the world and created organizational structure outside of just the teaching of Ephesians 4.
Right.
They seem to be present throughout the human order.
Okay. All right. So we have apostles, we have prophets, we have evangelists, and then I believe it's verse 11 talks about pastors and teachers. And those are two different groupings, right? Pastors being more of a term that deals with shepherding, caring for people, and making sure that needs are being met, and so on and so forth. And teachers, who again different necessarily in the role of pastor or shepherd, in that is teaching the Word of God and making sure the church is doctrinally sound. Would you agree with that? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we see that most people are a combination, right? Like I think about someone like David Watson, right? He is a prophet teacher,
right?
Like he wants to teach, but his passion is for restoring primitive Christianity and Methodism, right? Whereas I had even just in seminary, I had other professors who were less concerned with making sure that the historic faith was understood and promoted, and maybe had an eye more towards innovation in ministry,
sure,
if you will.
Sure. So on a local church level, sitting around a church leadership board meeting or a church council meeting, most folks around the table wouldn't necessarily be thinking, I'm here tonight as someone with an apostle gift, right? It's not on their radar screen, right? Or I'm here as an evangelist. And yet, I think as overseers in the church, we have an opportunity to help folks recognize maybe their tendencies and their giftings, so that they can say, you know what, I've never had a name for that, right? I didn't realize that I had this prophetic voice, and you can kind of help coach that out and lead that out into the reality of their lives and ministry in the local church level, and maybe have a more balanced approach in the fivefold areas of ministry in a local church. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
At a church I served previously, on our leadership team, we went and did an inventory to sort of look at where we were around nominations time to say, hey, we don't have any prophets. Like, no one sitting around this table is thinking that way, because I've been nominating you guys for the last 5 years, and I am not naturally even thinking that is a helpful piece of the puzzle.
All right.
And it became a helpful sort of thing to, even in our conversation, for someone to say, okay, remember, I am, I'm the token shepherd here. So, understand where I'm coming from. We can't forget about flow.
Sure.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And I think as those concerns are raised within a covenant community, right? And there's a sense of love for one another and for the larger church community, people understand that, right? And it's not just trying to get an agenda item accomplished. There's a reality that, sure, we can't forget about flow, but we also can't forget about people down the street who don't know Jesus. That's the evangelists, right?
Yep.
Or those other communities around our particular region that don't have global Methodist or congregations or whatever congregation it may be. And that's the apostle part of that, right? And so in harmony, those 5 areas of giftedness kind of get lived out together in this really mysterious way as a local church lives out its calling. But it has to be raised as a priority to understand that these are all areas of giftedness that Christ has instilled in his church. So my understanding is, and maybe Hirsch speaks a little different to this, every church has all these. Would you agree with that? They may not be identified, they may not have a seat at the table, but if Christ is the one who's gifted the church, right, through the Holy Spirit, those areas of giftedness are there, but they may not be realized yet. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, unless there's been an intentional effort to stamp it out and run it off.
There you go.
God in his grace tends to give people the gifts necessary to be a faithful church.
Okay, so that's an interesting twist on that. Okay, so that is a reality that perhaps it has been, maybe one voice or 2 voices have been diminished and maybe run off, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be that way, that you can raise up new leaders, and I think prayerfully can discern what are we lacking and how can we do something about that. So again, the title of the book,
5Q by Alan Hirsch, Reactivating the Original Intelligence and Capacity of the Body of Christ.
Yeah, it's a good read, and it is a good topic for leadership to address, to say, okay, how are we living into this Ephesians 4 concept of local church leadership, and are we making sure that those 5-fold areas are represented at the table?
Yeah.
You recommend the book?
I
mean, it's a bit heady, right?
Yeah, I mean, so it is. It is not nearly as dense as his other book on the topic, Permanent Revolution.
Yeah, that's the one. I think he taught on at Exponential.
So 5Q is his less heady, less academic version of his teaching on this stuff. I don't love Hirsch's writing style.
I understand.
Similar to what I said about Red Moon Rising, if you're only going to read 10 books this year, it's probably not one you want to. But if you're going to read 25, it might be worth getting onto your list.
All right. So it's not a top 10, maybe a top 25. And particularly if you're interested in learning more about leadership development and giftedness within the local church, at least conceptually, it's a good thing to explore. And I appreciate it tied to Ephesians 4. It pushes me back to the scriptures to say, okay, what does that mean? And how do we live that out? So if you have questions regarding this book or this concept, you can email us at recoveringmethodism@gmail.com. If you have suggestions for other books for us to have some conversation about, Caleb's Library, send us that email and we'll try to touch on it in a future episode.
Now for some practical wisdom for church leaders. Let's open up the pastor's toolbox.
Let's open up the toolbox. But this time we're going to do something a little bit different than what we have been, because it is All Saints Week here at Riverside and across the Church Universal. And we thought maybe today, instead of talking about a specific tool that we have in our toolbox for ministry, we would talk about those other people who helped develop tools within us and what we learned from them.
And people who were tools in the hands of God to shape and mold us. See what I did? I brought us right back to the toolbox.
I'm impressed.
It's a gift.
It's something.
So we want to talk about people, individuals who have been impactful in our faith journey and in our leadership development as local church pastors, right?
Yep.
So I'm going to start in my home church in Southeast Ohio, a man by the name of Al Shipley. And Al was a layperson, and he was the head usher, and he always wore these wonderful tailored suits, if you will. I picture Al. He was kind of a tall, lanky guy.
Three-piece?
Three-piece. This was like early 1980s.
Ooh, leisure suits.
No, not a leisure suit. No. He was classier than that. All right.
But polyester, of course.
I don't even know that.
Okay.
But I just remember Al. He was a very kind man, and he said to me one Sunday morning and asked me if I would be willing to help him collect the offering the next Sunday. And I said, Mr. Shipley, I've never done that. I don't know how to do that, and I don't have a suit to wear. And he says, no problem. I'll teach you, and you don't have to wear a suit. Right? Now, you should know, being the church boy that I was, I wore a suit, right?
I bet you did.
I did.
And you never stopped.
That's right. I always wear a coat and tie. But Mr. Shipley kind of took me under his wing, and whether he knew it or not, I kind of think he knew what he was doing, but he became a model for me of what it meant to get out of the pew and serve the church on a Sunday morning in the local church. And I loved it, right? As a 15-year-old kid, 15-year-old kid, being able to serve. I took pride in that. And all I did was pass the offering plate, but I got to, be with Mr. Shipley on a Sunday morning, stand in the back and count the attendance and walk up front and get the offering plate. It meant something to me.
Yeah.
Right? So he was one of the first individuals that I can think of that shaped and molded me to serve in some capacity and give leadership to the local church. How about you?
It's a good story, yeah. So when I was a freshman in high school, my home church in Marysville hired a new youth pastor. And I was thinking back on it the other day. My first experience in ministry, like in every fast of ministry, was under the wing of Carrie Given. The first time I visited someone who was dying in the hospital, it was with Carrie.
With Carrie, yeah.
Right? We had a kid in our youth group who had bone cancer. So I remember, not going to school one day, riding with her in her Jeep down at a children's hospital and praying with Corey.
Wow.
When I was a junior, she put me in charge of a Bible study with a bunch of 5th and 6th grade boys, which shows a catastrophic failure of judgment. The first time I preached, it was under her supervision and leadership. Pretty much every ministry type thing that I've done and do, my first experience was with Carrie, and I think she modeled, at least in my life and in the life of our family, that perfect. I shouldn't even say perfect, but that really effective, sticky youth pastor role for me, right? That she didn't try to be the the single discipler of my life, but where she had a chance to step in and be one of those loving adults who invited me into serving Jesus in new ways. She stepped right in and took advantage of the opportunity.
So, a couple questions I have regarding that. Do you think that she did similar things with other students? Or was it just something about Caleb that she saw, here's a calling? No, seriously, nothing. Did she identify, maybe it's that you were willing to. I don't know. But do you think she identified that maybe Caleb has a call to ministry that we can help nurture and give him experience to? Or did she do this with many students in the ministry, and for you it led to an understanding of calling? What do you think?
I don't think I was wholly unique. And I think I think if we look at the other kids who were in youth group with me who are in ministry now, I think a lot of them have similar stories of Carrie being a piece of that. But I certainly think there was a specific and intentional invitation that I was able to receive that wasn't tossed out there as a blanket invitation.
Okay. She probably identified something about you and your personality and your giftedness and maybe a sense of calling. At how old were you? You said
probably 14, 15, 16.
Right.
Yeah.
And she leveraged that to give you some experience and exposure to, I would say, very unique ministry opportunity. Going to Children's Hospital to pray with another young person, that's very unique, right? Mm-hmm. And very, as you said, wholly unique. This time I'll say it with an H, not a WH.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I'm glad that you had someone in your life at that age that I think probably saw something in you and leveraged that to give you some exposure to some opportunities that probably shaped and molded you. Just as I did, only from my perspective, mine was just taking up the offering, right? But nonetheless, very important aspect that taught me that I can do more than just sit in the pew.
Some of us need pushed a little harder.
That's so true. That's so true. So I'll tell you another story about someone else in my life that I look back upon and give God thanks for, and that's Tom Tumblin. Tom is currently a professor at Asbury Seminary in Wilmore, Kentucky. And when I met Tom, I was a student at United Seminary in Dayton. This was last century, probably about 1997-ish, 96, 97-ish. And Tom was...
Yeah, that's like almost a decade before I went into the Children's Hospital.
Just shut up, all right, man? I don't need to hear that. So anyway, so Tom was an adjunct professor at United at that point, and he was on staff at Ginghamsburg. He was the executive pastor. And Tom came in and taught a class that I took at United on leadership. And it was probably the best class I took in seminary. And it kind of threw open a whole different perspective on what ministry could and should be. Because I'd spent a lot of time studying about, my Bible classes and pastoral care classes and preaching classes. And all of a sudden I'm exposed to these leadership ideas, right? And if you know Tom, and Tom's a very, I'll say, unassuming leader, but very effective leader. He has a very unique way of leading that gives us a different model of how that can happen. And of course, he obviously went on to Asbury and eventually became my dissertation mentor at Asbury Seminary for my D-Min. And so I've had this relationship with Tom now for, I don't know, almost 25, 30 years. And he's been very impactful on my life. How about you? Is there someone else that you can discuss?
Yeah. So I remember my first Tuesday at seminary. I met Jonathan Hanover, who's a year ahead of me in school. And starting that next week, I was spending the night between my Tuesday and Wednesday classes in his parents' basement there in Dayton. And Jonathan's dad is Tom Hanover, who comes here and who is retired from ministry, which is why he's here now.
Well, let's just time out. Tom would tell us that we never retired from ministry.
That's-
So he retired elder in the United Methodist Church and now an elder in the Global Methodist Church, serving a local church in the western part of Ohio and serving as a presiding elder.
It's true.
I believe, in the Allegheny West Annual Conference.
He's busier in retirement than
you and I are, just talking on a podcast, right? He's getting stuff done. So yeah, he's had a like 50 years of ministry, I believe.
Yeah.
So he started when he was 3.5, I think.
Yes.
You're welcome, Tom.
Yeah.
But
he grew a mustache at 13 so that the old church ladies would take him seriously.
There you go. So you got to know him through Jonathan, right?
Yep. So I started spending the night between classes in his basement. And that was my introduction to the Tom Hanover School of Ministry Leadership. That I then, when I became his associate at Sulphur Grove a year and a half later, took on a whole another level of intensity. And I so often in ministry, when things come up, I'm brought back to the many lessons from Tom, right? Recognizing that rarely is someone responding in a certain way for the reasons I think they are, right?
Unpack that right now. That's a heck of a learning curve and a good lesson for us to hear. Unpack that for us.
Yeah. So oftentimes in ministry and leadership, we are met with people who respond to an event in a way that is illogical, at least to the way that we are thinking through it, in a way that possibly could be coming across as aggressive or mean-spirited, or combative. And part of Tom's real wisdom, as someone who's been deeply influenced by the Bowen School and Ed Friedman and these sorts of people, is that oftentimes the thing that drives our responses is it is influenced by other things that are outside. So we don't approach any event in a vacuum. We have other things going on in our lives which are already bringing in their own anxieties and fears and frustrations. We already have our own history, which we project upon new things that happen to us and the assumptions there. So being with Tom really impressed upon me the necessity of thinking slowly in leadership, underreacting every opportunity one gets. The extreme importance of being a calming presence,
right?
Because far too often people are responding out of their anxiety and their fear and their former trauma and their former hurt, and even something that was innocuous on your end is being responded to with this, what seems like a excessive reaction, and being able to, instead of match that excessiveness, to come back down and say, I'm going to underreact, going to let you get this out of your system, and we can slowly move towards understanding, because clearly we aren't there yet.
Right. I often use the phrase, oftentimes in ministry, we are paying somebody else's bill.
Yeah.
Meaning
Yep.
An individual may have an issue or be angry or something, and it has nothing to do with you, right? And it has everything to do with the previous experience that's projected onto you, or a current experience that has nothing to do with you. It's unfortunately you have to pay the bill right now for it because you're the one standing there, or because you're the one in the role of pastor in their local church, and you're paying the bill for it.
Yeah. I remember another thing Tom used to talk about was the necessity of recognizing that change requires us to re-answer a set of questions around our identity. I think he got this from Erickson, if I remember correctly. So, every human, the first question that you seek to answer is, who do I belong to?
Yeah.
Like, this is foundational, fundamental to being human. The most central question of your life is, who do you belong to? Once you've answered, who do I belong to, then you can answer the question, what am I good at? Along with the question, what are my boundaries?
Right.
And then once you've established, who do I belong to, what am I good at, what are my boundaries, then you can answer the question, now who am I?
Okay.
So with every transition in life that upsets one of those three fundamental questions, it can become a crisis of who you are.
Crisis of identity. Sure.
So, we may think that there is a change that should not be a big deal. But, Sue Kibbe tells the story of there was a woman who would come in and did all the collation for her at the church.
Right.
They got a new copier that collated on its own. And because this question of, this is what I'm good at, like this is what I do to serve Jesus,
right,
is no longer necessary.
Yeah.
It ended up being sort of the first step away from the body.
Sure.
So being able to recognize that when people are acting in a way that is out of character and is not what we've come to expect of them, chances are there's something that's happened that has led to a shift in this question of who do I belong to, what am I good at, what are my boundaries, and until they can answer that question, there's going to be an identity crisis and there's going to be challenges.
See it all the time in the local church, right?
Yep.
Even some seemingly innocuous decision to change the way we communicate with a team or a committee. When I've always made the phone calls myself to my team or committee, now you want to send out this mass email, i.e., I'm no longer needed.
Yep.
Right? And that's not the message at all, right? And so part of that is just understanding that people are coming from all sorts of directions and have many, many different things they're wrestling with and struggling with. And part of being pastoral is trying to understand that and listen and hopefully be able to, walk with them through that time. So we've talked about a few people in our lives that have been impactful, whether they're ministry leaders when we were younger or pastors who have shaped and molded us over the years of our own ministry development. Anything else you want to add to this conversation of the toolbox that we've kind of adapted to fit where we are in All Saints Week?
Yeah, so you will be excited to hear this. And since you like surprises so much, I figured I would surprise you here with this exciting thing. So at the Allegheny West annual conference, I had a conversation with your doctoral mentor, Tom Tumplin.
Sure.
About what it would look like to take a group of pastors down to Asbury and, sit at his feet for a couple of days and let him teach us something cool. And he said he would love to do it. So...
Oh, I was waiting for but. He would love to do it, but...
There is no but.
Oh, I love it when there's no but.
No buts. I do not lie. But there's a so.
Okay.
So, for those of you who are listening who are like, well, I'd like to go to Asbury for a couple of days and learn some leadership lessons from Tom. Reach out recoveringmethodism@gmail.com. When we get a list of pastors, we'll put our calendars together and hopefully get those days scheduled down there at Asbury with Tom, and we'll I don't know. We'll come up with some cool name. The Recovering Methodism Leadership Summit or something.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. So more information on that to come. I know you and I had chatted about that a couple months ago, and love the idea, love the concept. I think it'd be great to be back at the Holy City and be able to.
The ginkgo's fallen.
What's that?
The ginkgo trees. The leaves have fallen. The gold is. Yeah.
I gotcha. Absolutely. I think it'd be great to be down there and spend some time on campus and have some great fellowship and learning together with a group of other pastors and leaders, and look forward to learning more about that. Make sure if you have questions or ideas or thoughts around the toolbox that you drop us an email at recoveringmethodism@gmail.com. Make sure you subscribe and maybe give us a 5-star review. That'd be awesome.
That'd be cool.
So I've been listening to our podcast on what is it, Apple?
Okay, an Apple.
How else can people find us?
I listened to it on Spotify yesterday.
Okay.
And I was pleasantly surprised that the mics were kind of in the same ballpark, and we're figuring it out.
I
believe it or not.
love it when a plan comes together. All right, so folks can forward these episodes to friends and say, you got to check this out. And I'm looking forward to the time when we can have a third person around the table and maybe do some interviews with some people, and have some folks come in and share from the local church or from a seminary or from our leadership in Allegheny West Annual Conference. And that should be fun as we expand what we do here.
Yep, that'd be great.
All right, this wraps up our episode this week. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Recovering Methodism podcast. We hope your heart has been strangely warmed. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, and leave a 5-star review. God bless.